Alex, my man. All right, it's been okay. Other than 5 minutes ago, when your image flashed upon my screen, when if we had to work out when was the last time I saw you, it must have been 2007, 2008, right? Must have been.
Um, I feel like it should have been no, because I was just thinking about one of the experiences we had, which was one of my best culinary experiences that I have to say when people ask me I've ever had, which was in Parma.
Oh God, yeah, you came to. Yeah,
Yes,
that
yes,
huge
yes.
pizza. That was you, wasn't it?
It wasn't. Yes, it was. I think the huge peach pizza, but that wasn't the one that I remembered. There was
Oh,
another
okay.
one where I just had a beautiful experience, and I think it was with it was arms you and your missus,
Mm.
and we went to a little I don't know bistro cafe outdoors, lots of tables, and literally it was like the start. I think the starter was my favorite thing, which was these giant pieces of Parmesan cheese with acacia honey to dip into it, followed by a meat platter with these beautiful meats, and then prosecco. But it was that cheese and that honey. I was having a conversation with someone who's travelled a lot as well, and we were kind of saying, "What's your best? Yeah, what's the best food you've tried?" And I said, "Well, my first thought was like." Every country has something incredible. But then it's like if I had to just go and choose a country, despite having spent very little time there, it'd probably be Italy. So yeah, so that was the last time I think.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely right. And yeah, those I do remember. I remember the restaurant as well. I can't remember what it was called. I remember the guy. He's a really nice guy as well, who managed it. And yeah, but now that you mentioned that huge, it was like, was it a half-meter pizza or something like that? And you had it without knife and fork, and you basically picked up the plate and just let this pizza sort of drip into your mouth, as it were. And it took
Thanks,
you about
thanks.
45. Do you remember this?
No, I don't remember that well. Maybe I've just kind of blocked it out to not give a better like representation of myself. But thanks for bringing that one up.
Yeah, no, you're right, but no, it was an entertaining evening actually, because I believe you were challenged into it,
Okay,
and
okay,
so there are mitigating circumstances. So it's not like you
okay. Thanks.
left Parma with this, where everybody's saying, okay, who was that barbarian?
Yeah, yeah.
It was all good. It was all good.
Okay, all right,
Yeah.
good. Good. But yeah,
Um,
that would have been the last time I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I was
What?
worried actually when you introduced that. You said one of your best culinary experiences. And I thought, 1 minute, nobody shares deep culinary experiences with me, and yeah, because it's just not top of my list of skills and so on. But yeah, cool,
I
cool.
think it also relates to expectations as well. Like, we were going out for something to eat, so it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to leave this lovely place, and I mean, it was
Mm,
like, let's go out to eat, and then suddenly like, uh,
mm.
yeah, and just the atmosphere, being outside, yeah, just for someone. When you go, I think when I went to Italy, that was one thing that just struck me, like spending time outside in cafes and things like that, which is much more of a culture.
Yeah, and obviously now under these circumstances, it's really to be sort of reminisced over and appreciated. This being able to share those sort of social evenings outdoors.
Yeah,
In and amongst a crowd of strangers without any concern for, are they too close, and why isn't she wearing a mask, that kind of thing.
yeah,
So
yeah, and just the healthiness of that. And I guess we're going to talk a bit in Bolivia. Sorry, we're going to talk a bit about Bolivia and things. But one of the things that is, I think, is so it's so healthy is just to be around people. It's just to have, go to that. In England, it's pubs and things like that, and it's just places that bring people together. And you're not necessarily talking to that person, but you're near that. You push past, you just brush past someone, and just that contact and things like that. Yeah, that's been massive in terms of what's now changed and what's will change.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's quite a bit to get into really, because obviously we could start from the Corona perspective, but there's more to it, because you introduce a slightly different element to it. There is the psychological factor, where sort of people miss that physical contact, and
Mm.
and that also stems from the kind of work that you do. So you've always been very sort of socially mature, as it were, developed in the way that you go about yourself, your behavior, but also professionally, if I'm not mistaken. Even in
Yeah.
London, you were also involved in social projects, weren't you?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. So how can I put it? So you made a couple of points. First one, like socially developed, mature. Like I've tried from a young age, like 16, 17. I think 17. I read the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I won't say that I kind of like understood everything. It was really interesting. And then 18, 19, I had 2 years of life coaching over the phone. By the way, not even over video call, over the phone. I never saw this coach. Really, but incredibly impactful. So on the personal front, like as partly as a result of kind of having a complete rejection of the education system and quitting my exams before the end of my A levels and not going to university. Partly as a result of that, I was open to and looking for, how do I develop? I didn't have that question in the way I've just said it, but that was kind of my thing. Like, what do I do? How do I develop if I'm not going through this kind of education path? And so that was on the personal side. On the professional side, and partly on the personal side, my sister was a massive influence, because she was when she was 28, she was working as a project manager in British Airways, doing very well, and just getting on with what would be a career. And she had this kind of thing, this kind of change, and she quit her job and she trained as a life coach, and that was in 1999, around there, when 2000, around that time. And she just started having these incredible experiences, and it really interested me. And then she started introducing me to people, networks, and things like that. And that was in a very formative period for me, because I decided not to go to university. And I've had 2 years of coaching and started learning about setting goals and things like that. And basically around the time that I was having the coaching, 2 questions that guided me for the next few years came up, which was, 1, what do I want to do with my life? And 2, what do I want to do? Yes, as a career. And 2, how can I use that to have a positive impact in the world? So those were the kind of 2 guiding questions. And after deciding not to go to uni, it was like 5 years of all sorts of jobs, saved up to travel and things like that. And it was there was a Prince's Trust course for people who were unemployed, and it encouraged you to have a week of activities, develop music if you had a music interest, and think about your goals and stuff. And I actually remember going on that and thinking, I love what these people are organizing. I would love to have their job. I don't know what this is, but I'd love it. I'd love to have it. And I'd had a few experiences where I've been like, I know there's, I know if people really interest me. When I was choosing my A levels, I didn't know why, but psychology, sociology, philosophy, those things really, there was something that was kind of drawing me towards them. My dad actually said, don't talk about ologies, you need to do maths, business, and things like that, serious subjects, which is interesting. He's now a real student of philosophy and psychology and other things, that human science. And so, yeah, so really from there, there was like little clues all over the place. I was like, I like working with people. I couldn't have put it again at that time, but I love like looking at how life is in the like kind of systems. So I like looking at society and different parts of society. So I kind of felt like I wanted to work with different parts of society. I didn't want to be in one place. I wanted to work with different parts and things. And then what really kind of kicked it off after those 5 years was getting a job with Young Enterprise, and the business education charity, giving really innovative business education in schools. But the job of the development manager in that area was to work with schools, work with businesses, work with volunteers, work with other non-governmental organizations. So I just loved this kind of, yeah, okay, you can really, there was a lot of kind of creative license to kind of go, okay, I'm going to do this event. I need to get these volunteers and things like, how can I find, and again, like, I didn't understand kind of systems thinking, but when you, if you look at that job and you go, okay, here's Harrow, Hillingdon and Hounslow where I worked, how can I look at this like a kind of system and then find win-wins? It's like, oh, okay, like I remember one thing I did, we were struggling to find business volunteers for primary school teaching. So we had this lovely primary school material to teach kind of the ideas and concepts around saving and things like that. And I had one school, primary school, which was 720 students, so 24 classes. So in one day, I needed to get 24 volunteers to deliver 6 hours of content. And what had been done once before was, no, someone had done some sort of small project around getting sixth formers along to volunteer. And so I went to one of my school contacts, secondary school contacts, and I said, look, you've got 100 people. Sorry. I said, look, you've got a great sixth form. I'm sure some of these young people would love the chance to deliver innovative content to young people. And I also knew the power of developing young people by giving them responsibility and duty of care over younger people. Incredibly powerful for their development. And so I talked to one of my contacts that we always had a really good relationship, and said, well, look, I've got 100 kids in my year. And I was like, wow, okay, that's a lot of volunteers. And so in the end, we devised this plan where we'd have 2 lead teachers. We had them in pairs anyway, because it's more supportive. We had 2 lead teachers in one classroom, and we had 2 support teachers, teaching assistants, I guess you call them nowadays, in the same classroom. So in one day, we had 98 students go to one primary school, deliver 6 hours of content to 720 students. And it was one of the best win-wins of my time in Young Enterprise. And I just loved this idea that if you can create systems and maps, you can see the links, and it's much easier to build win-win outcomes. So in terms of professional formation, I think the idea of kind of systems thinking, very basic. I'm not like, it's not a kind of scholar in systems thinking, but kind of the idea of systems thinking coupled with how do you create environments to achieve certain outcomes with people. So that really, and now, the last, since that time, my interest has always been as a facilitator now. How do you create context to achieve certain outcomes? And that can be anything from physical things like what music do you have, how do you have chairs, to how do you model certain values? So how do you model vulnerability to encourage people to feel okay about going a bit deeper in sessions that you're running, just as an example. So yeah, so on the personal level, personal development has got a kind of a bit like, well, there's certain industries that have got a bad name because, as someone once said, it's a very low bar to entry, but it's a very high bar to be effective. So everyone can enter, but it's very hard to find people that are effective. So that has been a massive interest personally and professionally. And then professionally, it's been more and more about how to create context, powerful context for people to interact, and kind of couple that with systems thinking to think about how, as a facilitator, I can have the best impact in the area of society that I want to work with, or across different areas. I don't know. There's a lot there, so I don't know if you want to kind of.
No, it's great, and the whole point of having conversations with people with different backgrounds, different experiences, is other than the obvious exchange of views, it's informative. In some ways, it serves to reconfirm, I guess, established ideas and thoughts. So, Yeah, I remember when I worked with the Armenian community, which you became familiar with in your capacity as as an honored member of the
In my
team.
capacity as a kind of central, slightly right, sometimes upfront player.
Absolutely, absolutely. Bustamian was yeah.
With the money in.
That's brilliant. Yeah, but I mean, I've found the exact same truths that you just explained, which is basically you essentially get younger people engaged. You get them to um, um, do tasks in a motivated, voluntary fashion by giving them the ability to do things for themselves, make their own
Yeah,
decisions, take
yeah,
charge.
yeah,
Whereas the reason why I realized this was the case was because when I took charge as a young person, you know,
yeah,
that's what I did. I took charge. I organized things, and when older people came and told me to, maybe you should do it a different way, I said, yeah, maybe you should sit down and watch. Because if you're a young person, you need to experience that kind of thing for yourself. You don't need some
mm,
gray-haired dude like me to sit on a chair watching you saying, yeah, shaking my head,
yeah,
wiggling the finger. No, sorry, piss off.
yeah,
This is my time. I have a lot to learn from older people, of course, but
mm,
when I'm doing something, let me do it. You know,
mm, mm.
I think that's empowering.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. It's like giving young people like agency, allowing them to own a process and things like that. And the thing is, and this is, I guess, this is talking a bit about how we develop as human beings. But the one of the most challenging things to be able to create that space for young people is our own beliefs. It's our own beliefs and practices. So as adults, I'll talk about myself. I'll just give you just a simple example. So over here, I wanted to replicate some of the leadership programs I've done in England. So I got together with Noelia, who's just an amazing kind of entrepreneurial, social-minded, getting things done person, and who's got ample work with young people. And we put together a program, and the idea was basically how can we teach leadership, emotional development, and other elements of human development that kids won't generally be exposed to in their formal education. That was the premise. And I remember the first year. We had a couple of facilitators who would be facilitating groups, or the second year, I can't remember. And I realized that my style was quite controlling. And that was because in the back of my head, I was kind of like, oh, I've got loads of experience. I know how this works. And that's one of the most kind of limiting beliefs. It's like, I know how this works. There's a model for how this works, which is ridiculous coming from England, where there was a model, and that's great. And then trying to kind of go, well, so this is the model in Bolivia. That's ridiculous. And because of that, I realized that that the benefit for me was that I had the security of that people were following my way for my program. So I'd reach my outcomes and things. The cost of that was that they felt constrained by it, and they felt they could feel insecure because they're like, oh gosh, are we doing it Alex's way? And I realized that so in the next iteration of the program, I made a conscious decision to step back, and go, here's what we need to achieve. Here's the session, and I trust you to work with that. So bring yourself into, and as like for anyone that's a facilitator, and the top best facilitators are people who take the best from around them, and then use that to kind of curate or cultivate an identity based on who they really are inside, plus those things that they've learned. it's not a copy of another person. So actually, for a facilitator, when you're to develop, it's like it's cultivating what's inside you and coupling that with the best around you, not just kind of trying to copy. It's like your own identity has to. It's a bit like when chefs say, "I want to see you on a plate." It's like where's you within everything else that you've learned from other people. So I realized that as a leader, it wasn't, my beliefs and my tendencies were holding others back. And I think, and we've got a real culture of blame in our society, and I think it's incredibly unhelpful. So, as well, looking at those people and those controlling uncles and aunts and things like that, for me, the question is, well, what are the beliefs that are driving them, and how flexible are those beliefs, and how can I safely, like in a safe way, challenge those or not, and adapt. But yeah, I couldn't agree with you more that you have to, people, young people need that, to be given that responsibility, that agency, that trust, and along with the acceptance that they will make mistakes, and that if they're looking to run over a cliff and you're like, that's probably a mistake they can probably do without for their development, but 99% of other mistakes are okay. The cost benefit is okay. The problem is that we define, like, the cost of the mistake we estimate is too high. Actually, we need to be much more accepting, and I can speak for myself.
No, I absolutely agree, and I made a mental note while you were talking as well, that I wanted to add this idea that it's okay to fail, as in it's a part of your natural development. So
Yeah.
there are companies where I work with, I train, so English language communication and so on. I mean, none of our lessons are limited to that. We always go way beyond. We talk mainly about
Yeah.
business stuff and so on. But I mean, that's just because I find disciplining myself to within a very limited as its subject matter. I just can't do it.
Yeah.
But one of the things that has often come up is you get these very experienced project managers, and then for some reason the project doesn't quite hit all of the targets, and what happens? They're fired. And I think to myself, that is the only real failure of that project, is firing that project manager, because that project manager, in experiencing that failure, has learnt and a certain amount of knowledge which he or she would not have learned had he or she not failed. And by firing that person, another company is going to benefit from that experience and that knowledge, and not you.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I think I mean, it's difficult to, there'll be, I think there's so much behind that, which is like, what's this person's ability to learn? Was this a foreseeable error? How big was it, and things like how much does it cost us? But definitely think that one of the hardest things to do as a leader or a manager is to manage yourself in the moment when people have, in inverted commas, failed you. And it's like, how do you treat the person from that? And for me, that comes back to, how do you manage what's going on in your head and in your body at the moment that this thing's screwed up? Because very often and I've had this experience of myself, where I've been great and great person, friend, leader, and things like that, and then shit hit the fan, and I've been like, oh, how could this happen? And what's going on then is me not being conscious of allowing my beliefs and my emotions in that moment to color what I'm seeing, and then responding to those, rather than kind of being able to ground myself and say, okay, step back, and how do I want to be in this moment? Because those are the critical moments. I can encourage you for a year, and I can tell you how great you are, and how pleased I am and how we're getting on so well. But when something goes wrong, if I'm then like, if I then switch, it undermines everything else that I've been saying, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. As in your sort of spontaneous and sincere reaction to adversity essentially is what, other people's perhaps can measure you by.
Yeah,
And if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs, yeah, to
yeah,
use a famous line, then essentially that's an important skill or natural
yeah.
ability to harness.
And I think, those, I think if you said, like, this is I think this is one of the challenges with anything kind of around personal development or professional development, that there are things that we can say, like, as a leader, you need to be calm, as a leader, you need to be grounded, and something, and, that information is everywhere. We do workshops and we say, okay, what have you learned today? And people come out and it's like, yeah, that my communication has got to get this, that, and the other. And it's like, and I sometimes feel like we're talking like on the surface, and it's like, well, that's the outcome, and we're all clear on the outcome. Probably a kid of 15 could tell you that a leader needs to be calm and communicate and things like that. And it's like, so, if that's what it is, if that's the challenge, why is it so hard? Why is it that leaders that could recite to you the leadership principles or whatever, then go in, and when things go wrong, they respond in a completely different way. And I think this is where kind of conscious personal development can really help, because actually it's recognizing that it's not just being able to power out those kind of things, as we do in work, sometimes in workshops, but it's actually to say and this is now, for me, this touches on kind of things that interest me around men's work. It's taking time, it's consciously taking time out to explore beliefs, explore what emotions are coming up, reflect on how I've been and things like that. And basically, as someone saying, in men's circles, kind of look into your shadow side and the things the aspects you don't like about your person, or that you don't want to recognize, because that's the space which you're coming from when you're in the toughest situations. We go into that shadow space. And so, and let me personalize it, because when we generalize and we talk, when we generalize, it can be kind of like, yeah, so it can be a bit kind of boring and abstract. So let me personalize it. So, my, if you like, an element of my shadow side in relationships is passive aggression. And I think I learned this from one of my parents, and this kind of reaction to conflict and things, where I step back and will create stories about why my partner's done this, and rather than kind of communicate that and say, look, I feel this, and things in a healthy way, keep quiet, be cold, tone of voice very distant, body language very distant, but not overtly aggressive or insulting. And that's something that I've had to work on for years. And I'll just tell you one more thing, because this is really personal, and it's something that maybe 10 years ago I would have really struggled to recognize. But I remember a partner I was with a few years ago, I remember we were talking about films, and I said, oh, I really like this film. And she said, oh, okay, that's interesting, because there's this other film that's like that film, but like much more depth. It's got much more depth. And, she like, so I'll tell you my process. My process for that was, oh, she said to me, you're not educated. She sent to me that that's what she sent me. And it just kind of really hit me. And that's partly because I've had to work around insecurities around my education, because I didn't go to university and things like that. So in the first 10 years of my career, it was like, oh, you don't have this. So it was always an insecurity that came up. And so then 15 years later, there's this innocuous, I think this like this this kind of harmless comment. In fact, if you look at it objectively, it's a friendly comment. It's like she's giving me a recommendation for a better film. Fantastic. And I can't tell you, like, the process I went through is sitting at the dinner table, and I'm there and I'm feeling humiliated, feeling kind of like a child and things like that. I go into the room, I go into a bedroom, and I'm just like, I can't believe, and then I start to kind of punish myself for being such a child. And I've got all this going on from that comment. And like I kind of give that example in the hope that people can recognize that happens. One, it can be as simple as that. Two, and very often it touches on something that's much deeper within us. And if we're not prepared to take time out and consciously look at that, and go through a process of kind of recognition, acceptance, and then thinking about how to move forward, then we're going to get tripped up all over the place. And then, being calm, grounded, and saying things like that as a leader become meaningless because we're not prepared to actually do the deep work that will enable us to put that into practice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Again, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course it makes sense. And thanks for sharing the intimate moment. I do think that if we allow our minds to sort of roam, that we should be able to reflect upon, if not an identical, but perhaps a similar experience where something somebody has said has touched us deeply, or an event has occurred, and perhaps our responses to that occurrence, were not best planned, or as it were, because we just simply were not mature enough in the moment to deal with all of the information that was coming through to us. In another chat that I had with a lady called Tatiana, we were actually talking about inequality, so gender inequality, which is where this particular element stemmed from. And one of the ways that she said that she has managed to overcome these kinds of inequality issues in the workplace is that she doesn't let other things influence her. She's very determined. She basically owns owns a situation, as it were. And she also referred to emotion. So she's like, don't hide from emotion. If you feel emotional in a certain moment, it's okay to express it. So this idea of in a professional environment you cannot express emotion it's not ubiquitous. It's not a universal rule, and that it's actually okay. I mean, do you have you had sort of situations where you have actually said to people, look, let it out.
Like in a professional context and a personal context, yes, because as a facilitator, you depending on the content that you're working with, you could have a very business level kind of workshop, or you could have a very, very intense, deep thing, and there, the facilitator's got duty of care and things like that. But I like that statement that I disagree with 100% is is don't push down the emotion. There's a great bit in King of the Hill. I don't know if you remember that kind of cartoonish kind of Family Guy series, but a bit more real. And anyway, Hank, this middle-aged American kind of Midwest type with his 2.4 children and things. He's with Rona, I think, his wife, and she's like, I'm feeling really deep, intense sadness or something like that. She said, and he says, oh, don't worry, I've got, I'll tell you what you do. Just breathe it all in, and then push it down into your body. And he says, how do you feel? And she said, I think I feel okay, but I've just got this massive pain in my and you're just basically exemplifying like what we kind of do as a society, which is we push down emotions because the values, society that says do not share, do not express, control your emotions. And I think that's one of, especially with men, but it's not limited to men, is a massive issue. Now, there is a, like you said, it's like there is a, it's not a kind of 100% thing. It's like you can't just burst into tears in a business meeting and things like that. And I think one word that really helps me with this and make a distinction between repression, the extreme of repression, the extreme of just like full expression, is channeling. It's like, can we learn to channel our emotions? So part of that, there's a concept in facilitation called state management. And the idea of state management, it relates very much to open emotional intelligence. It's, a 3-step process. I explain it as a 3-step process. It's and that's taken from books and things like that. It's notice or pause and ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? So it's kind of like noticing. Then it's kind of recognizing where that's coming from. So it's, where is this coming from? And then what do I want to do with that? And so if someone has made me angry, it's like, okay, let me give you an example. You say to me, Zach, oh, Alex, I just wanted to talk to you because I had this business plan and I created this business over 1 year, and my business partner just screwed me over and he's taken all the money. And you're talking to me as a friend, right? And let's say that 10 years ago, I had exactly the same experience and a business partner screwed me over and I haven't processed it. So I hold a lot of anger around that. So what happens if I don't manage my state, and we've all probably experienced this, your friend tells you something like that and you're like, no, so right, get your lawyers on board, like, I'll help you, this, that, and the other. So like on the surface, it's like, here's Alex, Zach's friend, and he's 100% behind Zach. The problem is that I'm not responding to you, I'm responding to the pent-up anger and frustration that happened 10 years ago. So I'm not even with you, I'm in my own experience. And that's the problem with not going through this process of recognizing and channeling emotion. The person that bursts into tears in a business meeting, that's not a healthy way of channeling emotion. It doesn't, it's what it is, what it shows is a lot of pent up emotion. Or it's the same as kind of a couple having an argument over a cup of coffee and how it's made, and the guy just picks up the coffee and slams it against the wall. It's like, he's not reacting to that situation. He's reacting to 10 years of failing to express himself in a healthy way and having pent up anger, sort of thing. So I think like there's a, coming back to your friend's comment, I think definitely we don't recognize this as that. We don't promote recognition of emotions. There's no way you train for that. Look, if you think about like 3 influences come to mind in terms of how we learn to deal with situations, or maybe 4. So the first one is our parents. So whatever kind of issues they have, and this is not to blame parents, recognizing like every human being, they're doing the best they can with the information they have at that time. But good or bad, they've given us a lot of examples, and many of them aren't healthy ways of processing emotion. Then we have school, where you have teachers with the same issues or the same kind of imperfections and modeling, and our peers, and then you have the workplace. So none of those contexts are set up to teach us how to deal with our emotions. And then alongside all of that is kind of culture. And from music lyrics to series to films, we're taught to be babies. We're taught to be babies and be dependent the pinnacle is probably the Mexican soap operas. Just incredible, like in terms of the extremes of, but what they're doing it in an extreme, the drama and everything, but they are more reflective of what culture teaches us in terms of just complete irresponsibleness, complete not owning your own emotions, not processing, not doing any work there, just spilling them out in that moment, and that being a healthy way to be. So yeah,
I think I can, and it's unfortunately, perhaps it's a bit judgmental on my part, but I perhaps should count myself lucky that I haven't indulged ever in Mexican daytime soap operas, though I may have seen a couple in passing. But I mean, these are sort of like epic series, which have been going on for what 30, 40 years, and they are just they're just it's like a staple, isn't it, of life in
yeah,
many areas.
yeah. And look, I mention them because they're an extreme, but I've watched hundreds of hours of other things that even overtly could like seem more intellectual, but have the same kind of messages of
Mm,
non-responsibility. I love action films and things like that, and the person that's had wrong done to them, they don't process anything; they just respond, and that's our model as men.
mm.
It's like we, just react to our instincts and go and destroy everything and
But this also reminds me, interestingly, to something that you were saying a bit earlier, and the thought also appeared in my mind, which is that we are very we see, or if we see or recognize a problem or a situation, and then we try to build a binary solution to those problems. So
yeah,
society is built on good and evil, right and wrong.
yeah,
Yeah, traditionally you've got obviously man and woman and so on. But the further society develops, or at least opens itself to the possibility of development, we see that these traditional binaries don't really exist. They are there because we've created them, in the same way we've created a concept of time to help us to organize ourselves, but they're not
yeah,
there. There's no natural or divine state which says there has to be only two solutions or two options to a certain issue. um, and it's it strikes me as interesting because when you have conflicts and conflict resolution, there are normally two arguments. One sort of counters the other, and neither side is ever really conscious of the possibility that either both are right or both are wrong.
yeah,
It's one or the other.
yeah,
And society pushes us actively towards those kinds of situations. It's still
yeah,
very binary.
yeah. Yeah, definitely. And you just made me think. Well, I mean, conflict resolution is it's a massive area. It's something that I'm more beginner, if you like, starting off on my journey around non-violent communication, conflict resolution, and everything that I've so far experienced around that convinces me that everyone should be trained in non-violent communication and things like not things like mediation, but my words, like how that would change relationships in business and life and kids and things like that. Your thing about kind of right and wrong, good or evil, just quite like this kind of book. I think there's a massive area where we could go, which is kind of the polarization of politics and things across those different countries. I think there are better people to comment on that than myself. Um, I struggle myself, to be honest with you, with the fact that there's this, with coronavirus and with a lot of other political conflict with conspiracy theories and things like that. I've really I've struggled myself with friends who both support certain ideas and are against certain ideas, and I've got a lot of work to do there, I think, basically. So I think, in terms, I think I can recognize what you're saying, and probably not the best person to kind of, I don't know, to give a kind of overview of how this is impacting our world, but it's definitely, through social media and the things, we're becoming more and more polarized, and it's. I think the point that I make is that it's we're being challenged less and less to stay open to, like you said, being both right and wrong at the same time, or and accommodating others' views. So I think, we, through social media, through so many things, it's becoming easier to do that and not having critical thought. And my friend shared something that the World Economic Forum said that one of the most important skills going forward is the kind of ability to analyze, and that takes a curiosity that comes from being able to calm the belief that we're definitely right about something, and being okay in that security. So I think there's a lot of challenges there individually as a society.
Okay, all right, fine. I think when it comes to the business of expressing thoughts, ideas, and opinions, even if there are occasions where we are perhaps not so well informed, an opinion is still an opinion as long as it's given, sincerely, and there should be no reason why anybody should feel that their opinion was, perhaps not, relevant, perhaps in a more universal context. And so, let's say it like that. But yeah, I mean, everybody should feel, you should feel free to express a thought, in any capacity. Yeah.
I guess I just wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to speak. I feel comfortable just recognizing like that I'm not an expert on certain things, and that I've got an opinion, but that's not. It's not. There are better informed opinions, I think, around certain areas.
It's interesting, though, isn't it? Because when we talk about polarization, obviously you raised politics as an issue, and I'm actually pleased in some ways that social media has actually provided people with a platform, many platforms, upon which they can engage and participate in political discourse. Because so many times I have spoken to people of any age group or of any sort of social category, and the response has been, "I'm not really interested in politics. Politics is not really my thing." The fact that social media has allowed people to express themselves in that sense is perhaps a positive. As I said to you before, sort of off camera, as it were, or off mic, I've withdrawn essentially from social media because of the level of hatred that is expressed therein. I think people should be far more circumspect with the way in which they express themselves, and the damage. They should be aware of the damage that they can do with those words, and this shouldn't only be limited to former presidents of the United States. It should also be applicable to any person who voices an opinion in a public forum. I am responsible for the words that I use, and if I say something which offends somebody, then I should be willing to apologize, even if I still say no. I think what I said was right, but for offending you, for that I apologize. And I think we should be able to be mature enough to have that level of responsibility.
I mean, I think in an ideal world we would be, but then I'll go back to, well, what was our training for that? Like, it's like an assumption that we should be able to step into a car and be able to drive it. It's like, well, did you have lessons? And because I think there's certain things that we assume as a society are just part of development. So part of, here's one of them. Part of becoming an adult is you get better at managing your feelings. It's like, no, you don't. You just get better at covering them up. Some people do through good examples or personal experience, but I feel like a big majority don't, and it's evident in so many interactions, both in whether it's on TV or within families or networks or things like that, breakdowns in communication between governments, all these kind of things. So I think there's a lot that's it's assumed that we have the abilities to do these things when actually we've had no training and really bad models for it. So it's like, one thing is creating a forum and a context and saying, hey, I'm going to create this thing. Here are the kind of ideas behind it. This is how I'd like everyone to behave. The other thing is those people having the emotional capacity, the skills to be able to engage on those things. And I think what shows is when you've got open forums and things like that, very often they transcend into, or they develop into, like you said, something very conflictive and even violent and things. And I think that's just a reflection of our, of the fact that we aren't trained for that kind of interaction, and we need it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Alex, there are so many areas that we could spin off to, and I think it would be cool to obviously also have, to have another opportunity to sort of meander, as it were, through some of these topics. But what I'd essentially really also like to understand is how things are in Bolivia. How different are they to Europe or the UK with regards to managing and organizing itself as a society through Corona, and also tying that into the discussion that we've just been having with regards to managing and channeling emotions, because what Corona sort of thrust at us on a secondary basis was the vast increase in domestic abuse, and so therefore being able to control these kinds of situations, and in some way trying to provide relief to those who need them.
Okay, how can I do this in a, okay, I can talk about, first of all, kind of practicalities, and then a few other things. So I'll just give you a kind of timeline.
Sure.
We started hearing about coronavirus, coming to Europe. I heard a little bit about China, but then Bolivia heard about, that this was happening in Europe, and that's when it became bigger, and especially the fact that Italy was one of the first, was one of the hardest hit first. That really caught people's attention, because there's a lot of Bolivians that reside in Italy, obviously in Spain, a place like Bergamo, and I think Bergamo was an epicenter, Milan area, and so actually the initial government response was I'd say was pretty good, in the sense that they I think it was mid-March, we had complete lockdown. And what that means, because everyone's got different versions of it in different countries, was you were allowed out of your homes once a week between 6 in the morning and 12 midday, 6 hours to go and do your shopping. So my day was Tuesday. So I was out once a week. So on Tuesday, I'd literally get up 5 in the morning, 5:45, I was kind of leaving to get into the queue for the supermarket, and then carrying the bags home, and I was with my dad, so obviously I wanted to take all precautions. But it was, that was 6 or 8 weeks, mid-March, mid-May. And then June, we started to relax the things. People could go out a little bit more. There wasn't one day of the week. And by July, the things had spiked, and they got to a high kind of end of July. And then they started going down from August until about November, I think, when they started going up again. So with that, things were more and more relaxed. I think what's just come to mind is Holland right now, because they didn't have as strict a lockdown, and now they've got more strict on it. And I always thought of the thing of, like, if I give you 20 grand a year for your salary, and then I reduce it to 15, you're going to be really angry. But if I give you 15 grand of salary, and then I increase it to 20 grand at the end of the year, you're going to be over the moon. And I think, like, when I think of Holland, I think, wow, maybe that's really playing out. Our reference point for a lockdown was almost the strictest lockdown you can have. I think only China was stricter, in the sense that they literally couldn't go out. Now, okay, so that happened, and now we haven't gone into lockdown again. Like, so we got to something where it was like 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. You can basically go out and things like that. At one point, restaurants were open, but then they closed up again towards the end of this year. And now we only have quarantine on Sunday. So we've got 5 till 10, and then on Sunday, it's like you shouldn't go anywhere that's more than 200 meters from your house. People's response was incredibly, in the cities, incredibly responsible. People were wearing masks. People were using alcohol everywhere. You go into a place, they spray you with alcohol, they take your temperature, which I think we've now found out is pretty useless. But the masks and the alcohol were really, followed and respected. And I think there was a kind of effect of, like, you walk down the street and you see everyone else in a mask, you'd feel very uncomfortable if you were not in a mask. So I think people did take it seriously. The result of having 3 months of lockdown was crushing for economically, because as you can imagine, swathes of people that live day to day, literally they get this product of selling these things. They've got 100 of these that they need to sell something of to get their food for the day. It's literally like that. And obviously, we have a very kind of big market culture. So yes, we've got supermarkets and things like that, but we've got massive, like 10 by 10 corner market. And so obviously people started staying away from that. So businesses suffered there. And and I think, like, the reaction from people is different in the city and the country. So if you go into a little village or town or something like that in the jungle, you won't see anyone wearing masks. We just see very few people wearing masks. I don't know if it's being away from a lot of police authority. I don't know if it's or if it's just being away from all, everything that's happening and things like that. But so that was one aspect of it. The other aspect of it was that we have one of the worst health systems in South America. And so the idea was recognizing that very strict lockdown for 3 months to allow health services to build up and prepare. What happened in July was health services very, very quickly became overwhelmed. We had a few people, pictures of a few people dying in the streets. I don't think it was as extreme as maybe Ecuador. Again, that could be a perception, but they were overwhelmed for a little bit. Hospitals, there were stories of people that needed to go into intensive care, going to 6 hospitals, and the person dying because they couldn't get in. But those were anomalies, I think. And then, but yeah, everyone was very conscious that the health system wasn't great. So I'm trying to do this in a kind of organized way. But yeah, so with this second wave, in inverted commas, that started kind of November, December time, yes, people are getting infected, but doctors are in a better position to treat people. They're still not doing it perfectly, but they're in a better position. And people, I think, a little bit more relaxed. Not very much, there was hysteria. There still is hysteria. And it's amazing, like, even from young people in their 30s and so, that are more hysterical than their parents and things like that. I think one thing that really helped was that there pharmacies in Bolivia, there are pharmacies that have a license to produce products based on natural remedies. So there are many medicinal plants here and things like that, and there are pharmacies that can just literally pull out a product based on a herbal kind of treatment or things like that. That allows things like chlorine dioxide as well to be produced. Now, I appreciate that is a highly, highly controversial solution. It's been promoted by many doctors over here across South America. It's being used. I've used it. My dad used it to recover from coronavirus. My girlfriend is a doctor using it with patients with incredible results. But I don't want to go too much into it because we could get into it. It's literally a rabbit hole. I appreciate, papers that I read and respect, newspapers, reporters. calling it bleach and this thing, this, that, and the other. There's a massive controversy over it, and I only mention it to kind of give you. You've asked me for what's happening over here. It's being used a lot, and I've been very close to the results because my, members of my family and my girlfriend's family who have been treated with it and things like that. But the general point here is that there's been license which is very quickly produce and come out with alternative products and therapies and things like that. What's been very damaging is that there's a black market. So people are coming out with all sorts of things. There's been a lot of fear with amongst doctors. They're tackling a new virus and they're throwing a lot of medication at it. And I've got not first-hand experience of this, but my girlfriend who revises patients what they've been prescribed and things like that. The cost, I just read about Mexico, families in ruin from the cost of medication and treatment, with things like ivermectina. I can't think of the English for it, but things that are being used across the world that aren't necessarily as effective as they're being promoted, as is being promoted, but they cost a hell of a lot of money. And in Bolivia, those can be decisions that ruin lives. I mean, over here, I think around a minimum stay in a hospital in intensive care is $1,000 a day. To give you a perspective, minimum wage is $300 a month, and a vast majority of the population, are working below minimum wage, informally and things like that. So it literally, you've got someone that goes into intensive care, dies after 6 days, and their families have a crippling bill. So I'm going into specific detail. It's been a very, very mixed experience. I was talking to Alex actually in Beijing, and a couple of months ago. We were actually saying, as relatively privileged people within the country, me and him, that actually our experience has been a lot easier. You talked about domestic abuse and things like that. I'm living in a 1-bedroom flat with my girlfriend. It's very calm. We don't have kids. There's so many things that we have that so many families don't have. That I can, and even with that, we've got irritated with each other at times, and whatever. Like everyone's got that story, but then to imagine those kind of multipliers of kids, of previously unresolved things, of financial things, we're both able to still work, and so I think, you could say as a country it's been a different experience to say England, but people are living very similar experiences, both excellent, okay, and terrible. Yeah. I don't know if you've got specific lead up questions. I was trying to cover so many things there.
No, it's not necessarily specific. Generally to identify how things are handled over there. So this concept of only being able to leave in a 6-hour window, throughout a week, is very, very difficult for me to visualize. So as in Berlin, we have a lockdown.
What was your strictest lockdown? What was the logistics of the strictest lockdown that you had?
Yeah, we haven't really had a very strict lockdown at all throughout the entire problem. As in, every day I've been able to go out for a run, go and ride my bike, go for a walk, go to the supermarket, anytime, any place. When I've been in a public area, I have to wear a mask. I have to maintain a social distance. But beyond that, nothing, no restriction at all whatsoever.
And obviously, I assume bars were closed and gyms or I don't know.
Yeah. So bars,
okay,
yes,
okay.
bars, gyms, clubs,
places
restaurants.
of massive gathering. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. These
All
were
right.
closed. Parties were not allowed. Only two households could get together. At the moment, it's not even two households. Only one person can visit another household.
Yeah.
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 So, but what I mean is, limited movement of myself, my person, and my family was never really an issue that we had
Wow.
to
Wow.
encounter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
And so at the moment, at the moment, Europe's being hit very hard by more virus variants that are more kind of transmissible.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, well maybe not. I'll speak for England, because that's what's happening, and it's almost forcing a heavier lockdown. It's just interesting. I wonder if like the decision not to lock down so strongly was the confidence in the health services and their ability to cope with what would, and the treatment and things that Bolivia couldn't count on. But now I wonder if now with the transmissibility, like the strain that's already been put on the health services, the strain that's been put economically on people who aren't able to work, making them more susceptible, and just being in your house for such a long time is now creating the need for a stricter lockdown. Would you agree with that, or did you see that differently?
No, I think any additional risk that you sort of throw into the mix naturally lends itself to increased restrictions. If you
Right.
really are serious about solving issues on a societal level.
Yeah.
What I have found from reading the numbers and reading the articles specific to Germany, at least, the areas where there has been a far greater number of infections and increases in those numbers has been where people have refused to recognize government warnings. So they have
Right.
continued to congregate, they have continued to meet, exchange, as it were, the germs, because it wouldn't happen to them. Yeah,
Yeah.
oh, no, but yeah, he's my friend. He's all right. I mean, he's never been
Yeah.
anywhere. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
People don't wear masks. They don't keep distance, and so therefore the number of cases has increased exponentially in those areas. Other areas where people are more respectful of these measures, the numbers have not necessarily dwindled, but they haven't increased at an alarming rate. Yeah,
Right.
and this is the difference. So even if you have a more contagious variant, that doesn't necessarily mean that the numbers are going to jump, because if you isolate, then that very, very, very contagious
Yeah.
variant has nowhere to go.
Yeah.
Theoretically
Yeah.
speaking, at least.
Yeah.
Again, we're not doctors,
No.
I can't comment upon the specific science of the issue. But we have had the variant. It is obviously in Germany. 2 weeks ago, there was a hospital where they recorded 14 cases of this variant, and they just locked down. They isolated the hospital. They closed it down.
Yeah.
Nobody in, nobody out,
Yeah.
and that's the only way to deal with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one thing that comes to mind now is one. It's possible that we would have considered a stricter lockdown. But I think there's a recognition that the already fragile economy has been absolutely not obliterated. That's exaggerated, but it's been affected massively. I think I saw a report that said Latin America was, there was progress being made, and the next 10 years or more has been wiped out in terms of progress, in terms of what's been lost as a result of the lockdown. So how fragile people were, and things, and people are still, we're coming back to having to make up loan payments and things like that. Or a lot of many Bolivians will take out a loan, invest it in a bit of construction or something like that, or in their business, and then go towards paying it back. And often they're quite leveraged with that, and so they're very susceptible to suddenly having their work cut off and yeah, not being able to make their payments. So it's hard to know. I think they globally they estimated that something like 1 trillion has been wiped off the economy or earnings. It's just numbers that you can't really process. And so yeah, I think there's a real worry for anyone that knows about the economy in Bolivia that another lockdown like March could be even more destructive for the economy, and then people will die as a result anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really worrying, factor. And I'm sure you've read a little bit about some of the discussions between the European Union, AstraZeneca, the UK, in the supplication
bit, yeah.
of the vaccine and so on. But I can imagine for countries which are generally perhaps considered poorer, access to these vaccines is perhaps limited. I can only imagine people are looking, from these sort of poorer countries at the developing farce that is the agreements that have taken place with these companies, and thinking, you guys don't even know how lucky you are.
There was. It's weird to read about the AstraZeneca Europe UK argument, because from what I understand, the AstraZeneca had made these two separate contracts, and the argument was about whether AstraZeneca had agreed to supply a certain amount by a certain time to Europe, or had agreed to supply to Europe on the basis of their availability after prioritizing the UK. And that's what I understand. And it seems amazing that there's that kind of ambiguity within a contract that would have been so important, but maybe there isn't. We don't know. We haven't read the contract.
Yeah.
But I think, again, I was watching a report that was saying that wealthier countries will have a mass vaccination by the end of this year. Okay, so that 80. I don't want to go into percentages, but a majority of people, and then other countries will take into next year, and some longer, and some will never actually fully vaccinate. And obviously that's around the availability of the vaccine and things like that. And it's one thing that's been a bit jarring has been learning that learning about countries like Canada securing 5 vaccines per member of their population. So I think I was talking to our partner the other day, and I was we were kind of reflecting a bit and saying that when we've been on a trajectory of development and civilization in inverted commas as societies. One of the longest periods without a world war, despite what's been happening. And it's something like the pandemic has kind of given us an opportunity to see ourselves when as a society of the world, when chips are down, and it's like, how are people's responses? And it's you kind of see that whilst there are many amazing stories of higher behaviors from different members of society, as well as a massive kind of drive to grab and to everyone for themselves, again, dog eat dog. And sometimes this came out of something where very often I hear Bolivian people comment that, oh, look at how Bolivians are, like they're cheating each other from this or things like that. It's not only that. I hear those comments, and I'm just like, well, look at the world. Look at the world at the moment. Everyone's like that, given the correct context. The definition of that person is not that they're Bolivian. The definition is that they're human being, and it's like any human being will eat their children. Given that's an exaggeration, but will go. It has the potential to go to extremes. I remember a book small is beautiful. In the book, the German economist Schumacher said, there's nothing as violent as fear in a rich person. Yeah, well, anyway.
Okay, interesting. Alex, I think we could probably spend the next God knows how many hours discussing various topics, but yeah,
wow, it's been an hour and 20 minutes.
I know, exactly. This is going to be one of the longer sessions. So would it be okay if we revisit a few of the other number of topics that we've sort of noted down on a future occasion? Is that all right?
Yeah,
it's possible.
I think that's fine. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Let's see. We talked a bit about child. I'm just trying to kind of recap, like how we develop as young people, how we develop as adults, a bit of emotional development, a bit of Corona, and how it's been affecting the two. Was there anything else that we covered?
Yeah, no, I think that's basically what we have covered. I mean, there are a few other things that I wanted to get more into detail with so we've done a bit of emotional development, but I wanted to go a bit further into that. Maybe we can look at that the next time.
Yeah, definitely.
Society's making lifestyle easier and harder. That was another thing that you highlighted. Yeah, these are areas that I think we should really look into.
It'd be good. And actually, I wanted to, one thing that one of my kind of interest within the work that I do is to say how can we take wisdom and ideas, powerful ideas and things like that, and make them accessible for people to put into practice. So it's like, how do we turn all this into our own practice in our lives? And that's what really, really interests me. And another thing is, so like we can touch on that when we touch on things like how society makes it easier to live certain lifestyles and things like that. I think I'd just mention that. Yeah.
Cool. I mean, this is something which also greatly interests me. So I've often thought about, I've studied politics and a bit of law and a bit of philosophy, and I've read about, God knows how many different types of things. And, the main point for me has always been applicability. Yeah. It's great having all of these theories. Yeah. Where can you apply it? Where is the benefit? And sometimes, in political discourse, there is no direct form of application. There is no practical side necessarily. And that's when I not necessarily lose interest, but I say, okay, let's shut down that valve. And then we can turn it back on when you tell me how you want to apply it. Yeah. And then we can talk about that. So I completely agree with you. I see that there's a lot of room for development, obviously, and also within our discourse. So I look forward to that. Alex, it's been a pleasure. It's been great catching up. I can't believe it's been so long, but on the other hand, I can believe it, and it's unfortunate. But the next time won't be too long.
Yeah, it is what it is, and it's lovely to be able to connect after so many years and just kind of go into chat. And I think this. I think this is also, as we all recognize, we're given many opportunities. And one of those is that we're not also kind of crazy out doing everything all the time. So we're like, oh, actually, maybe we can connect. And like, we're here Wednesday morning or afternoon. And it's like, it's wonderful to be able to do that. So yeah, thanks. And thanks for creating this space.
Thank you. Thanks for engaging. And good luck. All the best.
Yeah, you too. And we'll catch up soon.
Definitely. Take care, Al.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.